I hope that for most of you, the title of this video means almost nothing, and that you have no clue what a high value man is. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my video, 11 books that I think high value men should read. These are books by women about women that I think are great and could be very good books for the high value man. So what is a high value man? If you are completely unversed in the terms of the manosphere and the men's rights movement, let me just really quickly run through this. There are people, creators, who I won't name, I won't do them the honor of naming them here, on YouTube and on all social media, who create these kind of horribly misogynist videos and things which theoretically instruct young men how to become a high value man, with the idea that a high value man is more desirable by high value women, and therefore if you wanted to get a really attractive woman for a relationship or for a one night stand, you have to be a high value man. Of course, the things that the manosphere values or claims that women value in the high value man all have to do with income and looks and confidence, which really is just boorishness, and the trappings of wealth. It is an outgrowth of the old pickup artist movement or ideas. It is spawned the incel movement, the involuntarily celibate movement, which spawns a lot of really angry young men who aren't having sex. And it kind of preaches these horrible things about what men should be. And in some ways, my video title is intended as clickbait. In some ways, I hope to draw some of those people in and to kind of explain why all of that and all that concept of high value man is wrong. Because, we shouldn't seek to be high value men or high value women. We should seek to be high value people. And none of that has anything to do whatsoever with how much money we have or what kind of car we drive or how attractive we are or how rude we can act and still get people to like us. In other words, being a high value person has nothing to do with acting like Donald Trump or any of the other people who populate the manosphere who he's so popular with. I think from most of our point of view, we realize, most of us who are older perhaps, and I'm sure almost everybody who's younger, who hasn't fallen into this manosphere trap, we realize that a high value person seeks to understand other people, has compassion, looks for insight, looks for ways to do things to help others, to understand others, and that's really what makes somebody a high value person. And that's kind of why I think reading books matters. I am one of those people, I did a video not too long ago about, which was a tag video about what is reading, which I attempted to answer that question. What is reading? What are we going on about here? What's the purpose, or kind of what's the purpose? And for me, the purpose, as I said in that video, is that connection. My mind connecting the mind of the writer, and me seeing the world that they describe through with their eyes, but through the lenses of my own experience, so that I can gain some understanding, perhaps, so there can be some kind of bond that's created, so some kind of level of understanding can be created. And I really think that that's valuable, and I really think that is one of the purposes of reading, and that's one of the reasons why I've been trying to read more diversely since I was on BookTube, so I can experience things that I never would have experienced, get points of view that I never would have, gain an understanding perhaps of people across ethnic, racial, gender, geographic, time-related lines, to gain all those understandings, because I think, to me, that is important. Now, I'm certainly not saying that's the only reason to read. I'm not saying that's the only reason that I read. As a matter of fact, I just kind of think it's a byproduct of reading. Now, a lot of people I know and admire a great deal would say, that reading can never really give you that experience of, experiencing what somebody else experiences and understanding things the way other people understand them. And I agree. Each book you read is a singular experience created by a singular, usually, author, and therefore you can't really expect to gain a universal understanding by reading. But I do think that we gain our understanding by accumulating experiences, by accumulating knowledge, by accumulating these things we read, and therefore, what we read can create that as well. No single book is going to give you an accurate picture of the entire experience of being anyone in the world at any time, but to me, an accumulation of reading those books can help you get closer to that, and I think that's worthwhile. So, I believe that if the high-value men who watch Manosphere videos were to read the 11 books I have on my list, that they would see a change in themselves, that they would gain an understanding, particularly an understanding, a compassion for the experience of having been or being a woman. So I have 11 books on my list. Starting off, well, I think is probably the most obvious book that I think men should read, that's by a woman, and that is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This is a classic essay in which Virginia Woolf essentially explains, why women, up until the time of her life, were less likely to be able to engage in creative endeavors. She posits the idea that what women need to create, to be creative, to exercise their creative abilities, are the same things men need. Time, space, money, some level of support, some education, that all those things are necessary. And that's why it kind of comes down to this room of one's own kind of idea. And I think that book, that essay, was incredibly instructive for me in getting me to think about things that, coming from a male perspective, I never would have necessarily thought about, even though, I grew up in a family of creative women and independent women and working women and very strong women. Some of the things that are in that essay are not things that would have occurred to me. So the second book on my list is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This is my favorite of the Bronte novels, in which our main character is a woman who is somewhat mysterious. She's living in this place called Wildfell Hall, where she lives with her young son. There's no husband on the scene. She doesn't appear to be very wealthy. She's standoffish. She paints, and that's how she earns a living. And through the course of the story, we learn about her first marriage, and there's a lot of time spent on that first marriage. And I think The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is a really important book for showing the lengths to which women had to go in Victorian England to, be independent, to exercise independence, the restraints that were put on their capabilities, on the things they could do to escape bad marriage, and the strength of a young woman who refused to compromise her values, who was able to escape from this bad marriage and was determined to raise her son on her own if she had to. I think it's an incredibly good and powerful book, and I definitely think it's well worth any person reading. The third book on my list is The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. This is actually my favorite Edith Wharton novel. I've only read 4. This is my favorite. Lily Bart as a character just appeals to me. If you haven't read House of Mirth, which I buddy read some time ago with Britta Boulder, which was a great experience. But if you haven't read House of Mirth, Lily Bart is a young woman who is from kind of the top social class, but events in her life endanger her ability to remain among that class, not the least of which having to do with debt and problems with marriage and her own kind of pride and unwillingness to, perhaps accept help or to enter into relationships which might save her, but which she doesn't feel like she can enter into and retain her integrity. It's an incredibly sad story, but I do think it's really instructive, particularly in looking at 19th, early 20th century conditions for women of that social class and the limits they had. And again, if you notice there's kind of a theme in these first 3 books, the limits that existed for what they could do and how they could support themselves and how they could be successful, both in the United States and in Great Britain. And it's just a great book. And Edith Wharton is a beautiful writer. Number 4 on my list, we're going to jump ahead quite a bit here. At number 4 on my list, I have Sula by Toni Morrison. Sula is a book that I need to reread, but I do think it's a great book showing an incredibly complex set of relationships that exist between women. At the heart is a relationship between Sula and the other main character whose name I just forgot, but their relationship as friends coming from 2 different parts of African American society, one that was more accepted, more kind of considered to be proper, on the verge perhaps of middle class status, and another from kind of the lowest level of this African American society that exists in this community where the story takes place. And yet these 2 young women become incredibly close friends, and that friendship really has a lot of tragic occurrences. There's all kinds of interesting stories about the relationship between Sula and her mother, and all kinds of relationship with the men in their community, and as it ultimately ends up, Sula and this young woman whose name I still haven't remembered, who's her good friend, they become estranged, and things happen between them that prevent their friendship, and yet in the end, it is that friendship that the main character, whose name I can't remember, longs for and regrets losing the most. And I really think it's a powerful kind of look at friendship and rivalry, and kind of the thin line that can exist between those two things, and all the things that could go wrong in a friendship. And I just thought it was a great book. At number 5, I have The Years by Annie Ernaux. This was translated from the French by Alison Strayer, I believe. Annie Ernaux won the Nobel Prize last year, I believe. And this is the only Annie Ernaux book I've read, but this is a great book in which it's called an autobiographical novel. It's kind of fiction, kind of memoir, in which the main character, who is Annie Erneaux herself, essentially lives through the decades following World War II. She lives in France, and it is kind of a record of political events, social events, economic events that affected her life, but also look at how she viewed politics, how she views work, how she viewed relationships, having children, and it follows her as she, grows older, and her relationships kind of change, and her attitudes and ideas kind of change. It's just kind of a brilliant look, I think, at a woman's life, and from a relatively young age, to old age. And I just think it's really beautiful, insightful, and powerful, and interestingly written, and I thought it was great. At number 6 on my list, I have A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ghríofa. This is a memoirish book that I read a couple of years ago, in which the author, who is a poet and Irish, the author attempts to, or the author records her attempt to resurrect the memory of this woman named Eileen Dove, who wrote a keening poem for her dead husband, which was famous in Ireland, and that kids read in school in Ireland. But it's also a discussion about her life and her kind of addiction to motherhood in a way, and yet how she wanted to, not be lost and subsumed by just the title of mother, even though she loved being a mother and she sought motherhood. And it's kind of her life then reflected in the fact that this woman who wrote this incredibly famous poem, almost nothing is known about her or her life after her husband was murdered, and after which she wrote the poem about, and in an attempt to rescue Eileen Dove from this obscurity, to rescue who she was as a person herself, Doireann Ghríofa is able to achieve that for herself as well. And I just think it's a really great book. Really insights into motherhood I never would have had, into looking at almost a feminist way of approaching or thinking about motherhood and loving being a mother, and yet not wanting that to be the thing that necessarily only defined her. I really thought it was good. Number 7 on my list is Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. This is the story of a young woman growing up on the Gulf Coast, and there is a hurricane approaching, and it's the story of her life in poverty, young black girl's life in poverty. And the great thing about it is the powerful ways in which it describes her relationships with her brothers, with her family, with the young men the young man that she's in love with her exploration of sex and understanding of violence and the racism that was present in their community. And it is just incredibly brilliant. It is a truly great book, and I think gives tremendous insights into that experience. Again, an experience as a white older man I never would have possibly had. At number 8, I have Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawikami, sorry. It's translated from Japanese by Alison Powell, I believe is the name of the translator. And this book is about a woman, a Japanese woman in her late 30s, who is just kind of treading water, I guess, in life. There doesn't seem to be a tremendous ambition. The relationships she's had have failed, but not necessarily acrimoniously. She doesn't seem to know what she wants, but she knows what she doesn't want. And she ends up spending a lot of time drinking at a local bar, pub, and there she meets one of her old teachers who's about 30 years older than she is, and they began to have a relationship, an almost completely non-physical relationship, and one that's not even necessarily romantic. And it's almost as though, in this relationship, she is, going through all the things you go through in a relationship without the sexual component being present, without having that as a part of the story, even though, it does work its way in and out. But she's oftentimes really frustrated with this old teacher of hers who she calls sensei throughout the book. And she's oftentimes, they're at odds, and sometimes they're quite close, and sometimes it's almost fit anyway. It's just a really, I thought, really touching book. Fills kind of emotional tension, but I read one review that said despite all that, emotional tension, it also, feels really cozy in a strange way, that you want to see what's going to happen with the characters, even though you have a feeling and I just thought it was a really good book. At number 9, I have a book that I just read back in May, and that's Boulder by Eva Bathasar, translated from Catalan by Julie Sanchez. This book is about a woman who's essentially a loner, who doesn't want to have much to do with anybody else, who falls in love with a more educated woman and follows her to Iceland and engages in essentially an obsessive love affair with this woman. And they move, and they're successful, and they're happy, and our main character Boulder, is really happy not being alone for almost the first time in her life. And then the other woman involved in this relationship decides she wants to have a baby. And while this doesn't hold any real interest for Boulder, she goes along with it, and it kind of shows the way in which I don't think just women, but women, men, etc., can sometimes be so obsessively devoted to their love interest that they set aside their own ideas in favor of somebody else's, and then the effect that can have, the kind of negative effect that can have, even though Boulder tries her best, I think, to not let her partner know that she's not excited about the marriage and not necessarily down with being a parent. Her partner knows, and that has negative consequences. So I thought it was great, as I think I've said that after every book. At number 10, I have Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. This book I thought was just really kind of a brilliant look at the relationship between between a daughter and her mother, and the inability of the two to understand one another, to understand the experiences that each person was coming from and how different their lives had been, and yet to really want to be in one another's presence, to really want to have that close relationship, at the same time almost painfully acknowledging that it would never lead to any kind of complete understanding. They go on vacation with one another, they go to restaurants, they stay in hotels. It's a very kind of quiet, not a lot of stuff happening story, but I just thought it was a really great exploration of that topic, of that kind of relationship. And then number 11, the book that I just finished and added to the list yesterday, is I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shreya. Vivek Shreya is a trans woman author, and she has written this really short book, maybe 60, 70, 80 pages, about her experience growing up as a boy, as a man, and attempting to fit in to the world of men, even though she was a gay man, and how she constantly felt intimidated and under threat from men, whether they were straight men or gay men, throughout her life. And even then, when she transitioned to becoming a woman, how that transition opened her up to a whole nother reason to be afraid of men. And I just thought the book was really brilliant at showing, I thought, in really spare language and in a really brief way, all the ways in which men pose threats, real and perhaps imagined, but pose threats to women and to women's psychological and physical well-being. whether they're a trans woman or not. I mean, with Shreya, they are a person of color. They are a trans woman. They are, you know, they are, you know, the poster child for intersectionality in some way. And I just thought it was incredibly powerful and brilliant. And definitely, there were one book on here that, you know, I'd want the high value man to read. It would be this one, because it was really eye opening to me. So I can't guarantee you if you watch these books you'll be a high value man. I'm certainly not saying I'm a high value man, but I think we all need to be a work in progress. And part of that work in progress, I think, can be achieved, or part of that progress, I think, can be achieved through reading and reading diversely. So there you go. There's my list of 11 books by women that I think the high value man, or men, or high value people, or people should all read. Let me know what you think about my list and the kind of theme of this video in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you for watching.